If you're visiting, if this is your first time watching online, my name is Aaron. I'm one of the pastors out here, commonly known as the better-looking staff member. And it's just a blessing and a curse, really. No, I'm just kidding. Super glad that you are here today. I'm excited about what we're talking about. Just to kind of fill you in, we are in the final week of a series that we've been in for the last 4 weeks, right? It's a series called Follow. And what we've been doing is we have been looking at exactly what Jesus meant by this invitation that he's given all of us to follow him, right? So it's not uncommon. Like you go and ask 10 different people what it means to be a Christian, you're typically going to get 10 different answers. And so throughout this, we've been trying to bring some clarity to it. So if you missed any of the last 3 weeks, go check it out online. Today, I want to kind of set up where we're going and what we're talking about with just this. This is something that's true for every single one of us. This is one of the ways that we navigate through life, regardless if you're a Christian or not. This is just something that we naturally learn because we always ask ourselves this question: what's in it for me? What's in it for me, right? Like, have you ever heard that before? Right, like so it's just something that we do. It's how we navigate through where we want to go, what we want to do. Is there anything in this for me? It's how we decide the places that we want to. That's why I don't go to Walmart. Like there's nothing in it except for like a heartburn and possibly a fist fight, right? Like that's what happens. So it's not good for me. I'm not going that way. That's how we decide who our friends and the people we want to surround ourselves with, right? Like some of us, we purge at least once a month our Facebook friends, right? Like it's okay, nope, not getting anything. I'm not getting anything out of this. It's not something that's bad. It's a natural question. And if you have kids, especially, like you've seen this, it's not something you have to be taught. Right? Like there comes this age when the word no or why becomes more and more common, right? Like so you start using this, well, I'll tell you what's in it for you. Like you'll be able to sit for the rest of the week. That's what's in it for you. Go and do what I say. Wash my car, right? Like that's just the pattern. But it's just this natural thing that we gravitate toward. And the power behind this is it will lead us into doing things that we don't necessarily want to do, but we know we need to do. Like if you go to the gym, if you go to work out, it's not necessarily, maybe it's a fun thing for you, but you see the benefit in it. I took up running. I started running at the end of last year, not because I like running. It's not fun, but I like being chubby less. So I start running. And you've heard me say before, right? Like people talk about runner's high. If you've ever had a runner's high, you were high when you started. There's no such thing as a runner's high because it's not fun. It's just not something you enjoy. But because I asked the question, what's in it for me? It moves me toward doing something that's beneficial for me. It's an okay thing to do. But we've got to be aware of this. Because what can end up happening is that if we're going through life and we're asking this question, what's in it for me? It can quickly move us into the life of a consumer more than we are a contributor. Right? Like it doesn't take very long of flipping through the pages of the New Testament writings, and you see Jesus taking his disciples, all of which I believe started following him because there was something in it for them. He starts taking their focus and moving it toward outside of themselves. Because we're created, we're called, we're living life as a contributor. I'll tell you a story to kind of set up what I mean. When my wife and I got married, we went to Puerto Rico on our honeymoon. I don't know if you've ever been there before. It's got a couple of smaller islands that are surrounded, kind of like the Golden Isles, right? Like you have islands that are kind of all making up this one island. There's a couple of smaller islands off the coast of Puerto Rico, and the only way to get to and from is by a ferry, right? And so we went to go visit one of these islands at some point during our trip. And what I didn't realize is, apparently, people often use this island as a way to sneak into the country, right? Like, so they would make their way to this little offshore island somewhere, and then they would jump on this free ferry and get back into Puerto Rico and then just kind of do whatever. Another thing I didn't realize is that apparently on our way back from that island, I was going to take the role of, or be assumed that I look like I'm trying to sneak in to Puerto Rico. Another thing that I didn't realize is that their checkpoints aren't the same like that you would expect, right? Like there's not this queue that you're waiting in line in and they go and check your ID and all this other stuff. what they do in Puerto Rico, they have some of their military that are walking around with automatic rifles, and they just kind of spot check. You look suspicious, come here. And so I happen to be the lucky guy that looked suspicious. I don't know if he looked at me and thought I was trying to sneak in, or he looked at me and then looked at my wife and said, no, something ain't right. Like, that's not, like, blink twice if you need help, right? I don't know if it was one of those things, but he came up to me, and here's the challenge that we kind of entered into. He spoke Spanish really, really well. He didn't speak English really, really well, which is fine, that's whatever, but I speak English really, really well. And I didn't really speak Spanish that good, and if I did, like, I didn't see how asking for a taco over the nearest bathroom was going to help me in that situation, right? Like, so as he's sitting there talking to me, I sit there with this dumb look on my face, like, and I keep kind of looking down at the gun, and as I do, like, this look gets more and more dumb, and he's getting more and more frustrated. So what happened is, as my wife was kind of walking by, she saw what happened. And you ever have those moments where you can always look back if you're married, right? And you say, this is evidence to me that my spouse loves me. And this was one of those moments, because if she ever wanted an out, that was it, right? Like, hey, what happened to Aaron? I don't know, but he's on like episode 3 of Locked Up Abroad, right? Like, that was one of those moments. But she didn't do that. Fortunately, she stopped, she walked up, and she asked, hey, what was going on? And she kind of cleared up the situation, and we were able to kind of move on with our merry way, right? And so I tell you that story because that's the perfect picture of what a life of a Jesus follower is supposed to look like. Right? Like, we're not supposed to just kind of go through life and see and notice issues and see things that are happening and then just kind of keep moving on and say, man, I really wish somebody would do something about that. Man, somebody really needs to kind of step in. Like, we are wired to be an influencer, a catalyst of change in our area, in the immediate area that you live in your home. And the way that Jesus uses this, the way that Jesus uses us in such a big way is this servant's heart. This attitude of okay, listen, I'm not going to simply be a consumer in the world that I'm living in. I'm going to be a contributor. I'm going to see the need that somebody has, and I'm going to step in and fill it in whatever way that I can. And what's incredible, it's mind-blowing, like that Jesus uses that to then bless us. Because here's the thing, serving Jesus will serve you. Following Jesus will serve you. It'll make you a better husband. It'll make you a better wife. It'll make you a better parent, a better teacher. It'll make you better with your money. Following Jesus will serve you in life. But what's crazy about it, it will serve you because following Jesus will lead you to serve others. That's the life of a Christian, of a Jesus follower, simply fully aware of the blessing and the gift and the grace and the mercy that's been given to us, and we walk through life trying to lend a helping hand to those in need. And can we just be honest for a second? You don't got to look very far today to find people who need help. And remember, like, we're called to make a difference in our immediate areas and serve in our immediate areas. Like, do you want to know what's going to make your marriage better is if we move into it with the attitude of serving. Like, it'll make you a better husband because you'll begin serving your wife, not just expecting her to fill your needs. It'll make you a better wife because you begin serving your husband and not just expecting him to fill your needs. Like, we're not constantly consuming and draining the life out of things. This is what we're called to do, and it has to be for me. For me, I'm just going to tell you kind of what's been on my heart throughout this whole pandemic, quarantine, isolation thing. Man, I'm no good at this because I'm just going to be real. Like, I see me a lot, and I see the benefit of what me being involved in something is going to do a lot, and it's really hard. It's really hard to jump some of these hurdles that we have to jump that's actually going to make a difference in the world that we live in. So that's what I want to talk about today. What are some of these challenges that we're going to face when it comes to living the life that Jesus has asked us to live in regards to being a servant of the world we live in, to being a contributor, to being someone who impacts change in society? And I can't think of a better a better illustration than a story that Jesus told. It's a story that, honestly, if you've been around the church very much, you've probably heard this story before. It's the story of the Good Samaritan. It's in Luke 10, if you wanted to turn there. If not, it's going to be in our big sky Bible over here, right? But it's the story of the Good Samaritan. And in this story, like a lot of us may know how this ends, I really want to focus in on how it begins. Because the way this entire story developed about the Good Samaritan is there was an expert in the law. He was a scribe. He came to Jesus, and he asked him this question. Now, as an expert in the law, that just simply means that he was very well versed with the Old Testament commands, like the 613 laws that you can read throughout the Old Covenant. He knew all of those, but he also would aid in developing new laws, man-made laws, that would help us navigate or help them navigate through God's laws. Sometimes it would just be to make it easier. Sometimes it would be just to set up this boundary. That way you never even get close to it. That was this guy's job. And he came to Jesus and he asked him this question. He said, how do you inherit eternal life? And for us, in our context, what we're talking about today is how do you follow? How do you become a follower of Jesus? What does it look like to surrender your heart to Jesus and go and move and do the things that he's asking us to do? And Jesus' response, he does what he always does, or not what he always does, but what he does really, really well. He answers a question with a question, right? Like he looks at him, he says, well, what, you know the law. What's in the Old Testament law? And then this guy answers, he says, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then love your neighbor as yourself. But here's the thing. So his original approach was to test Jesus, right? Because Jesus had been gaining some momentum in his ministry. He had a big crowd that was following him everywhere that he went. And this guy's original intention was simply to test Jesus. And you kind of hear that tone most of the time throughout this entire story whenever it's preached. I don't think that that's true after this moment. Like his original intention was absolutely one of he was egotistical and trying to trap Jesus. But what I think happened is Jesus, whenever he said, well, how do you read it? Strict Orthodox Jews, they would wear, I can't even pronounce the Greek word, like I'll embarrass myself and lose all credibility, but like they would carry these leather boxes kind of around their wrist. And in these boxes, they would have some of the Old Testament laws, one of which was Deuteronomy 6, right? Which is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. So whenever Jesus said, how do you read it? I kind of feel like Jesus would have been, well, you've got it right there. How do you read that? And so this next part that's on the screen where it says wanting to justify himself, I kind of feel like the tone changed a little bit. I kind of feel like the tone may have changed because, remember, he's not just familiar with the Old Testament laws. He's also one who develops new laws that make navigating the old laws easier. And so in this justification, I kind of hear this tone of, am I doing it right? Am I loving the way that God expects me to love Jesus? Because the reason I'm asking you is you clearly have this connection with God, right? Like you clearly have this understanding of his word that you are teaching with such authority. And am I doing this right? And so this justification wasn't one of a pompous kind of approach. I truly feel like this justification is knowing that I'm probably missing the mark a little bit. Knowing that there's probably something a little bit differently that I could be doing. And then Jesus launches into this story that would have addressed exactly what this guy was dealing with. And so there's two things. I'm not going to take up much of your time today. There's two things that I want us to kind of walk away from when it comes to loving our neighbor. One is simply pay attention to what grabs your attention. And the second is simply ask. You can go back. I'm jumping ahead. I'm sorry, Tammy. And the second is, how can I help? So let me explain how we get that through this story. In verse 30, it says this: Jesus took up the question and said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him, beat him up, and fled, leaving him half dead. Let's keep going. A priest happened to be going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And then, in the same way, a Levite, when he arrived at the place, and saw him pass by on the other side. Next slide. But a Samaritan on his journey came up to him, and when he saw the man, he had compassion. So let me kind of set the scene. This guy is beaten up, he's robbed, and he's left half dead on the side of the road. This is Jesus' story to him. And then all of a sudden you have the priest and the Levite, both of which work for the church, right? Like they worked for the temple. And they just walked right by. So they approached, they saw a problem, they saw the man, they saw what needed to be done, and then they kind of just stepped on the other side of the road and went on their way. Here's the thing. These guys are often painted as villains. And absolutely, they should have stopped. But they had legitimate reasons for not stopping. They saw the issue, but they had legitimate concerns for why they should or should not stop. There was multiple things that were going on, right? Like this was a pretty treacherous trail. It's a 17-mile road. I think it's like a 3,500-foot descent or climb, depending on which way that you're going. And it was common for people to be robbed on this road. So it could have been a concern for safety. Also, in their laws, what would happen is if they came in contact with a dead person, they would be ceremonially unclean. And with what these guys do, they wouldn't be able to work for a couple of weeks. And did I mention that this guy was naked? Right? Like, I'm going to toss you a blanket or something. And we tend to breeze by this stuff, but you come up, if you want to find out if something's dead or not, I feel like we kind of think that what's that movie, Cool Runnings? Hey, Sanka, you're dead. You remember that movie? Like, that's not how it works. What do you woke up and you poke it with a stick. Like, that's how you find out. Like, the same thing you do with a squirrel in your backyard. Is this thing alive or not? Like, so you couldn't just kind of yell at it. Like, so there was one of two things that had to happen. They had to approach this guy, which again would risk ceremonially unclean. They had this 17-mile journey ahead of them, which would again put them at risk for somebody robbing them. And this wasn't an uncommon thing. Thieves would often kind of lay in wait for someone to be passing by on this road. And then that's exactly what would happen. And they would often use the person that they just robbed as bait for the next person who is walking along the road. So it wasn't that they just saw him and decided, you know what, it's not worth my time. They saw him, but they had other priorities. They had other things. They saw the problem, and then they saw an opportunity and a need that they needed to kind of walk on by. And we read this, and if you're anything like me, you look at it and you think, man, if always it was that easy to notice somebody's need for help. But then if we look around, like we said, you don't have to look very far, right? Like, and I think that's one of the problems that we face is desensitization, being desensitized to the issues that we're walking in. I don't think that our minds are created to absorb the amount of information that we absorb in terms of catastrophes and everything else. Like, you can wake up in the morning, scroll through your phone, and you see things going on the other side of the world. You see problems happening in your own backyard. You see problems happening in the government. I don't think our minds are wired and created to absorb all of that information. And so we do what's natural. We become a little desensitized to it. We're desensitized to something with familiarity, right? Like, the more we're exposed to something, the less we realize its presence. And I think that's one of the challenges that we face. But there was one guy who stopped. And the difference, will you go back a slide for me, Tammy? The reason he stopped is because he had compassion. This is key. Compassion is more than just a familiarity. Compassion is an understanding. One of the reasons that I think drew compassion from this guy is he understood. So when Jesus said, "but a Samaritan," I think it would have raised a few eyebrows, right? Because it says, well, wait a second, this sounds like a plot twist. Like, you just told us two guys that were walking by. This guy's surely not going to stop, is he? Because if anyone had a reason to walk by, it was a Samaritan. There was hundreds and hundreds of years of intense hatred between Jews and Samaritans. It was racially motivated. It was religion. It was theories and philosophies and ideologies, and there was so many different things. It was just the lifestyles against each other. So there were years and years of intense hatred. If anybody had a reason to walk by, it was this guy. But what we see, what drew compassion from this guy, was not allowing the differences that they had to create a bigger gap. He allowed the similarities that they've experienced. It brewed empathy. It grew a compassion. Remember compassion? We talked about this, I think it was a couple weeks ago, right? Like it's instead of I love you with all my heart, like the word translated is I would love you with all my bowels. Super sweet. Like say that to the person you love tonight, right? Like that was what this means. But it's you know what it's talking about, right? Like this deep hurt, this awareness of this agony someone is going through in life. This you see this pain and you are moved to action. You can't stomach it. It's just this groan inside when you see the hurt. It's this understanding, not just an awareness of the pain, but it's an understanding. The Samaritan, he knew what it was like to be hated. He knew what it was like to be ignored. He knew what it was like to be walked by. He knew what it was like to be overlooked. He knew what it was like to be someone who needed something. And instead of all of these differences driving them away from each other, he said, no, I can understand what you're going through. Listen, the first thing we have to do, if we're going to be able to pay attention to the thing that grabs our attention, is we need to put a face to the problem and not just argue in policies and politics. It's understanding the person, knowing the person. I think this is one of the reasons why James, Jesus' brother, he tells us to be quick to listen, slow to speak. Stephen Covey says, seek first to understand, then be understood. It's approaching this conversation, this dialogue with questions. If I have to say something, I'm going to ask another question. Because the more you question, the more you listen, the more you understand. And the more you understand and the more we feel like we have this compassion and this urgency to not just see a problem and say, man, somebody should do something about that. Man, I hate that that's going on. Somebody needs to respond to that. Man, I really hope they get that figured out. Like this guy, he didn't walk up to him and just say, man, that sucks. Good luck with that, right? Like he saw this problem and he was moved to action that only comes from an understanding. Like I wonder how different our emotions and everything that we feel would be if we led the conversation with a question, seeking to understand. I can tell you in my own life, me and my wife, our most heated arguments come from when I am trying to explain something, and then she tries to explain something back. And then I try to explain something back, and she tries to explain something back. And I just wish she understood I was usually right. That's not true at all, right? But it's just these two people going back and forth. No, hear what I'm saying. No, you hear what I'm saying. No, you hear what I'm saying. And it gets louder and louder and louder. There's more frustration. There's more anger. There's more bitterness. There's more all of these emotions that are creating this gap. But what would happen? What would happen if in the middle of that moment you said, help me understand? Wait, so what are you feeling? Wait, so how are you hurting? Oh, what am I doing to cause this hurt? And suddenly we start moving through life more than just a consumer. We're a contributor. We're seeing the hurt and we're moved to action. But look what happened next. Let's jump down to the next slide. There it is. Nope. It isn't. Next slide. He went over to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on olive oil and wine. Then he put on him his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 denarii. That's 2 days' wages. A denarii would be a 1 day's wage. He took out 2 days' wages, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him. When I come back, I'll reimburse you for whatever extra you spend. Which of these 3, this is now Jesus talking to the scribe again. He says, which of these 3 do you prove to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said, go and do the same. the Samaritan walked by, he saw a need to be filled, and he gave what he had to give. Right? Like so after paying attention to the thing that grabs our attention, it's simply asking this question of, how can I help? And the sacrifice from this guy is incredible. Because remember, this is a 17-mile trip that is dangerous. You need to really kind of get to where you're going before dark. And he was going uphill or downhill, we don't really know, but he gave him his ride. He gave him some olive oil, which would be like it would serve as an antiseptic for the pain, and he gave him some wine, again for the pain and thing. Not wine like whoo, like hey, drink this, you'll feel better. Like it's not that. Like, but he gave. It could have been, but he gave him all of these things. You know what would have made his trip a lot easier? A donkey, some olive oil, bandages, and some wine, right? Like this was a long trip, but he was willing to give him what he had because it served his need. Listen, asking this question, how can I help, is simply asking, how can I loan who I am to where you are? You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know exactly what to do. I think this is one of the big reasons why we don't act sometimes. Well, let me speak for me. This is one of the reasons why I don't act sometimes, is you see this big problem and I have no clue what I would do with this. It's okay to simply say, hey, how can I help? Hey, I see that there's this problem. I see there's this thing that you're dealing with. Can I serve you at all? Instead, what tends to happen is there's this defensiveness that rises up. And I think it's a self-preservation thing. We see this problem, we see this challenge, we don't know what to do, so we kind of move ourselves to the side a little bit, and we say, well, I can't do this because of this. I can't do this because of this. Instead, just simply asking, hey, how can I help? Like, I would love to be in the conversation when the Samaritan came back a couple of days later. I would love to see that. Whenever he showed back up at the inn and he walked into the room and the guy who was beat up looked at me and said, what are you doing here? Well, no, I was just coming back to check on you. What do you mean back? Like, you're the guy? The Samaritan, you are the guy who the innkeeper was telling me about? You're the one who did all that stuff? Like, you? Aren't you supposed to hate me? Oh, yeah, I mean, but I really just kind of wanted to see how I could help. I would love to see the change that happened in these two people who hated each other. Now suddenly, because of an act of service, it began to change. Little by little by little. And I've got to ask this question, right? Like, imagine in our world, what would happen if we began walking through life with an attitude of, how can I serve you? Versus, hey, here's how you can serve me. Here's what I need you to do for me. Imagine what would happen in our marriages, in your families, in the different relationships, if we started walking through life without having the qualification of you have to do something to earn my good deed, and just, I'm going to give it to you. Why? Because the same reason that Jesus gave it to me. Mercy, grace. Imagine what would happen in your workplace. Imagine what would happen in the world around, your immediate world, in your friendships, if we began moving and asking, hey, how can I serve you? How can I lift you up? We tend to think that change comes with authority. I have authority to command something to happen, and that's what brings change. Jesus kind of squashed this whole mindset with one of the conversations he had with his disciples. They were coming to him, and they were constantly asking, hey, Jesus, you're clearly number one. Like, the whole movement's going to be named after you, but still, 2 and 3 spot, that's open, right? Like, who is going to be, can I be second in command? Can I be third in command? And there's one conversation in particular, John, you know, the one who Jesus loved, and James, his brother, they sent their mama to go ask Jesus, hey, would you let my sons be at the right and left? In other words, would you let my sons be second in command? And it was just this selfishly motivated thing. Like, hey, if you give us this position of authority, Jesus, then we can make change for you. And Jesus looks at him and says, hey, listen, do you want to be great? Do you want to do something incredible? Do you want to create the change that you're talking about? What I need you to do is serve. Do you want to change the world? What I need you to do is walk through the world not asking people to give you something, but give who you are to them. And change begins to happen. Do you want to become great? Become the least. It's this posture of humility, which has little to do with your skill, but it has more to do with how you contribute value. Not valuing ourselves so high up here that you're here for me and you're here for me and you're here for me, and suddenly we have this I'll look out for me and you look out for you world. This I'll look out for me and you look out for you workplace. This I'll look out for me and you look out for you marriage, friendship, relationship. I mean, the list just kind of goes on and on, doesn't it? But instead, it's, hey, listen, I'll look out for you so you can look out for other people. I look at it, my wife tells me, oh, you know the Forrest Gump scene? What's Bubba say? Like, I lean against you, you lean. That's not his voice, but it just kind of, that's what came out, so don't judge me. But he said, I'll lean against you, and you lean against me. Like, that's what we're supposed to do. The reason you can lean back against someone is because you trust that they're going to hold you up. And Jesus says that as following me, here's what your life is going to look like. You're going to have this posture of lifting people up. This posture of not having to raise yourself, but you're going to raise up other people in their values. That's where change comes from. That's what it looks like to follow Jesus. So let me ask you, then I'm going to pray for us and let us go home. Let me ask you, is there a barrier that keeps popping up in your mind that is keeping you from paying attention to the thing that grabs your attention? Is there something in your marriage? What's this thing that keeps popping up that we keep explaining away? Because this guy was in their path. Right? Like, that's what I mean. Like, you don't have to look very far to find people who need help. It's in your home. It's in your neighborhood. It's your neighbor next door. It's in with your kids' friends. Like, you're going to come across this kid of brokenness who's hurting. Like, who is God putting in your path? And the first thought is, man, I really wish somebody would do something about that. I hate to see that they're going through this. You know why God put them in your path? Because you have this burden for it. And he's given us this burden for the things that come across our path, not to simply be an observer, not to simply wish them well, but to actively get involved. What's the thing that keeps popping up and we keep explaining it away? Is there an area in your life? Is there something that honestly deserves more attention? And what can you do? Can you lead the conversation with, how can I help? How can I say this to the person that you find this challenge growing in a relationship with? Say to them, how can I serve you? And watch their mouth fall to the floor. And then say, I'll start by picking that up. There you go. Right? Like, just how can I serve you? What can I do to make your life better? What can I do to help you get from where you are now to where you want to be, or to where you need to be? How can I serve you? Outside of praying for you. Like, that's our out a lot of times, is I'm going to pray for you. Thanks. What about the physical need? Is there an area that we can give more attention to and that we can inquire more about how we can serve? Let me pray for you. God, thank you. Thank you so much, Lord, for your love and for your grace. We thank you for the example, God, that you've given, that you are not just an observer of our life. And we thank you, Lord, that you deemed it necessary to get involved. That, Jesus, you were willing to set aside your divine rights, step down into an earth in order to serve, to sacrifice who you are to help move us to where we needed to be. And God, just being honest, like, it's so hard to do that. It's so hard because this what's in it for me is ingrained into our life so much. And so we ask you to do the very same thing that you did with the disciples, God, and move us past the what's in it for me and move us towards the how am I here for you. Help us to do what you taught the disciples to do, God, and just lift other people up. God, we ask you to give us the strength and the courage to ask the question of how can I help? And then we ask you to help us to follow through, just like this Samaritan did. He came back. The follow through was absolutely incredible. And we ask you to help us to do that. God, we ask you in these areas that we've been trying to serve, that maybe it's hard to keep giving, maybe it's hard to keep trying, and we're ready to throw in the towel. God, I just ask you to breathe your breath of life and energy into us to help us see a hope that comes from serving, God. We trust you, Lord, and we need you. In Jesus' name.